You can teach an old dog new trick.
Say that again?
I said, I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks.
You're not old.
No, you're never gonna get old. That's
Good,
Okay.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Good.
I didn't say about you, Bob. I was talking about me. I love you, Bob.
Sure.
And you want chocolate chip cookies when you come here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So tonight, instead of trying to go through a couple of the different things like we've done, I want to just remind us that the Bible is written in a specific time period, in a specific culture, in a specific framework. And that when we try to read, even though God is the same yesterday and today forever, and even though God sits outside of time, so he is as relevant to us today as it was to the people in Abraham's time or Jesus' time or Moses' time. He's relevant in all ages. However, if we try to read the Bible from a 21st century American sort of viewpoint, we're at risk of missing things. And so all I want to do today is talk about a couple of things that seem rather odd and remind ourselves that at the time they weren't rather odd, and it makes sense. And if we think back to when we were in Mahdi and lived in the Middle East, we would go, oh, that doesn't quite sound as silly as it could if, for me, reading it from South Texas perspective, you go, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you do it that way? Well, because it's not 2023 and you're not in South Texas. You're in the Middle East and you might be 2,000 years BC. So if we think about Mahdi, because there are things, I give you an example. At one point in time, somebody asked me to say something or tell a story about something that happened while I lived in Egypt. And so I started out this story with, okay, so I've got a vendor selling watermelons coming through the neighborhood on his donkey cart. I got that far, and the person looked at me and said, what? I said, well, vegetable salesman, donkey cart. No, vegetable salesmen don't come in donkey carts. Donkeys are kind of, and no, that's not how that works. Like, they come, watermelons come in a big box at HEB and they're delivered by 18-wheelers with a fork truck. That's how watermelons come. And I'm like, well, yeah, but not everywhere all the time. So when the cabbage guy, yeah. So if we think about and read in here and try to take our head and put our head around it without having some consideration for where they were and what they were doing at the time, where we are really at risk is we're at risk of missing out something about God and how wonderful God is, because we kind of skip over these points that don't really make too much sense. So I'm going to just point out two things just for fun this week. And we're going to be in Ruth chapter 4. And then we're going to jump back to Genesis just for fun. So in Ruth chapter 4, if you start, and we're not going to read it all, but if you start in chapter 3, this is where Ruth goes to Boaz, and basically, because he's a close relative, her mother-in-law says, go to Boaz, see what he's doing, see if he will basically protect you. Basically, he will cover you. And he will, as a relative, he will provide you cover. Now think about it for ladies in the Middle East, and you guys know this, even in Egypt when we lived there, it really was against the law for women to inherit. Not impossible. It wasn't impossible, but it was basically not done. So if your family members died, the brothers inherited, and the brothers and uncles were supposed to take care of the ladies. And if some lady's husband died, she didn't inherit, her sons did. And the firstborn son was supposed to take care of mom. So Ruth, if you remember, Ruth isn't from Moab. She's a Moab, however you would say it, Moabitess, a Moabite, whatever the female version of a Moabite is. And Naomi goes to Moab, and her two sons marry ladies, Moabites, and they both die. So now, and Naomi's husband dies. So Naomi's counting on her sons to take care of her. First, her husband died, then her sons both die. There are no grandchildren, and both of Naomi's daughters-in-law say that they're going to follow her back to Israel. She tells them, nope, don't do that. Go back to your families. You know, I'm too old. I'm not going to have any more sons to marry you off to. Go on home. One of them goes home, and we know that Ruth doesn't. Ruth makes the promise that Mary Kay made to me when we got married. Where you go, I will go. There with you, I will lodge. Where you are buried, I will be buried. I will follow you around. And so Ruth comes back. I didn't tell her where we were going all this time. She promised this long before we were traveling all this stuff. But so they go back, and Naomi says, look, Boaz is A, single, B, a little bit older, has wealth, and could provide you covering. You should basically go to him and say, here I am. So she does. And he is impressed by her actions, by her, basically character. And he says, let me go see what I can do, because there was one other relative who was more closely related to Naomi and her family than he was. It says in chapter 3, verse 12, Boaz says, it is true that I'm a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you, as the Lord lives. So he has basically said, I will become your protector and family if the other relative, who is a closer relative than I am. Now we're all going, huh? How's this work? Well, think about it. Naomi has land, has family land, and the family land can't be inherited by her daughter-in-law. It has to go to a male of the family. In addition to that, if a person dies without children, a man dies without male children, then the wife is supposed to be married to a relative, and the children that they have are raised, the first one is raised in the dead man's name and becomes the dead man's heir. Even though it's a half son or daughter, they end up inheriting everything from the family. And think about it, in Israel, you're trying to keep all the land in the tribe. So all of these rules are for keeping the land within the Jewish community. So Boaz then gets up and he does something that we think is weird, but it makes all the sense in the world based on the fact that there is land to inherit. There is no male heir of Naomi, no male grandson. And he is not the closest relative of Naomi. So starting in chapter 4, it says, Boaz went up to the gate of the town and sat down, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. And he said, turn around, friend, sit here. That was his very polite way of saying, we need to have a chat, dude. So the close relative sits down. He then took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. So what's Boaz doing? Well, what's that?
Setting up a council.
Setting up a council. Remember, in towns, it's a walled city. every night, people come back into town and they close the gates. So if you want to do anything and have witnesses, late in the afternoon, go sit by the gate and wait for people to come by and say, hey, sit down, let's talk about this. Very traditional, very proper. He gets the relative to sit down. He gets 10 elders to sit down. So now he has the person to discuss things with. He has witnesses, and it's the end of the day. And so he then explains that Naomi has come back from the land of Moab, and she needs to sell a piece of land which belonged to Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, before the elders. If you will redeem the piece of land, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, and there will be no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. This is verse 4, and the gentleman says, I'll redeem it. I'll buy the land. So we know Boaz has money. He's rich. We know this from the story. The other cousin, if you will, has enough money to buy the land. He wants to buy the land. He's okay with that. And Boaz has said, you want to buy it, buy it. If not, tell me that you will not redeem it, and I will do it. He says, nope, I'll buy it. So then in verse 5, Boaz brings up a small point that he might want to consider before he buys the land. He says, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. He just said, oh, by the way, if you take the land, you have to take the girl. If you take the girl, you have to have children with the girl. If you have children with the girl, the oldest one becomes Elimelech's son, and he inherits this land. This land doesn't go to you. The land stays in Naomi's family. I just wanted to bring that point up, just in case you didn't realize this. And the closest relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself because it would jeopardize my own inheritance.
Mm.
It would mess up his family land and his family's inheritance. And he says, redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So Boaz has basically talked him into where he wants him because he plans to redeem Ruth by redeeming the land. And so this is the custom of the thing. It seems rather odd that Boaz doesn't just say to Naomi, okay, I'll buy the land, I'll take Ruth, yeah, we kiss, we hug, we schmooze, everybody's happy, healthy, we're fine. But there's a process that goes through because of the way inheritance works, the fact that women don't inherit, the fact that the fact that she's from Moab. Oh, by the way, Israelites weren't supposed to marry people from Moab, just in case you're curious. In fact, it was one of those of the Moabites had done some nasty stuff. Don't ever marry a Moabite, ever, 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 God said. By the way, Ruth is in the lineage of Jesus, just in case you're curious. So there must have been an exception in here someplace. So he goes through this seemingly odd ritual in order to be able to acquire the land and to redeem Ruth. It sounds odd to us. We wouldn't understand why you do it if you're thinking 21st, 23rd, 21st century. You're like, what do you mean ladies can't inherit? And what's this thing about people from Moab? And why is this such a big deal? And well, it is. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just simply the way that the customs were done. And so this, like I said, even today in Egypt, when my landlady's son died, before she did and before her daughter did, there was a lot of concern about who was going to inherit the family properties that they owned. Because guess what? They're both girls. So even today, some of that actually still exists in the Middle East. So,
Janet was back.
yeah,
Did Janet have?
Janet or
Janet,
maybe Kim and Amy, yeah. But, you know, the farm where Kim's got discussions about the farm and who actually owns the farm and when, yeah. So this isn't just 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. So if we then, in reading some of this stuff, don't take that into consideration, it doesn't really make any sense to us. And when we read in the New Testament stuff about Christ and the things that happen in and around the area where he is, don't take these kind of things into consideration. It's very easy to us to go, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. Oh, never mind. When really what Boaz is doing is truly redeeming Ruth and marrying somebody from Moab and having her in the lineage of Christ and David. So there's a whole a lot of redeeming going on in here with the customs that were kind of a little bit different. And we miss some of that implication because Ruth being from Moab and being allowed to be in the lineage of David and the lineage of Christ, there's a lot of redemption in there. And Boaz redeeming her when there's another relative and finding a way to redeem her even then, again, it's the grace of God running through this whole story. And we sometimes miss it if we don't catch the things. So we went to the movies and saw His Only Son, which is a story of Abraham trying to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah and not succeeding. And in that one, there's a bunch of things in there, but I wanted to point one out in Genesis 23.
Has anybody seen? No?
I didn't hear you.
Has anybody seen that movie?
No.
No.
It's interesting. It reminds us of some things. The producer has added a couple of things in there to make the story go, which are a bit kind of. But overall, it's interesting. So after he fails to sacrifice Isaac, Ishmael, whoever you're supposed to have up on the mountain there, after he didn't succeed that, it says in 23, Genesis 23, Sarah lived 127 years, and then she died in Hebron in the land of Canaan. Now think about the customs in the Middle East versus our customs. One of my favorite professors died about 10 days ago, and they're having a service for him tomorrow in Atlanta. If you're in the Middle East, would you have a dead person laying around for 10 days before you
No,
take him
24 hours.
someplace? I think there's a phrase in the New Testament where they say, but Lord, he's been dead 3 days and he,
Stinks.
yeah. I think in King James it stinketh. But
Stinketh. Okay.
So we know that in the Middle East, especially 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, we do not want to have a person who has passed away hanging around very long. And so Sarah dies, Abraham mourns over her, and then he goes to the neighbors and says, I need some place to bury my wife. And so he starts down in verse 3 of chapter 23. It says, he rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you that I may bury my dead out of sight. Think about it. He owns land in the middle of the desert. in a very flat plain. It's not traditional to dig a hole in the ground and bury somebody. It's traditional to find a cave or a cave that's carved out where you can put your family members. Remember the city of the dead, right? Okay, they weren't caves that were dug, they were mausoleums that were built, but it was so you could put somebody in there above ground, close them up, and they would become desiccated by the environment. That is the tradition today in Egypt. In a Muslim sense, if somebody dies before sunset, they wrap him up, take him out in the desert, and bury him without a marker. It's still very similar today. So Abraham says, I want to bury my wife, but I don't want to just bury her in the ground where I can see the grave all the time. I want to put her someplace in a cave, which is kind of where a nobleman or a higher status person would bury them. So he says to the sons of Heth, give me a burial site among you that I may bury my dead out of sight. And that's in verse 4. Now I'm going to jump over to verse 10 for a second, because that goes back to the story we had of Ruth. In verse 10, it says, now Ephron, and we'll get to him in a minute, was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron, the son of Hittite, answers him in the hearing of the son of Heth, even of all of who went in at the gate of the city. So where is Abraham? Just like Boaz, he went to the city gate. And just like Boaz, he's calling people aside and saying, Sid, I need to talk to you guys. And he's calling the people who are in charge, the royalty of the tribe, or whatever you want to call it, the leaders of the community. And so he's going to the city gate, he's calling out the leaders of the community, and he's saying, hey guys, my wife died. Can you give me a piece of land where I can bury my wife out of my sight? So he's the same picture as Boaz. He's doing the same thing. So now we're going to go into the Middle Eastern way of doing business, which is why we're doing this just for fun. So the sons of Heth in verse 5 said, hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. So Abraham says, very Middle Eastern ways, can you give me a place? And the leaders say, Abraham, oh, buddy, you're a prince among men. Pick a spot. We will give you that grave for your wife. Very elaborate, very telling gift, very generous. But is that really what's happening?
It's to buy them.
This isn't what's happening. This is the Middle East. How many of you have gone to the Khanalili and gone into a store and bought something and simply walked in and said, can I buy that purse? Yes. How much? $10. Fine, $10 here. Thank you very much. I'm leaving. Boom, and you're gone. Does that work?
Yeah.
No, that doesn't even come close to working. I referenced Gordon. He's been gone 2 years, but there was a guy that Gordon would always take us to who sold camel saddles and a bunch of other stuff to tourists. And even if all I wanted to do was buy a camel saddle, that was at least an hour. Because we were going to sit down and drink and talk and fellowship. We might get around to, and let me show you a bunch of stuff that I have that I have no interest in buying. Sooner or later, we're going to get around to camel saddles, and then we're going to get around to price, and then, and you know how it works. That's what's happening here. So in verse 6, they say, choose what you want, we'll give it to you. So Abraham rose, bowed to them, basically said, thank you, it's an honor. And he spoke with them saying, if it's your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, in other words, if you're agreeing with me here, hear me and approach Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field, for the full price, and let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. So he said, I need a place. Will you give me a place? They have said, we will give you anything you want. He has just said, well, what I really would like is that cave over there that Ephron owns, and I'm willing to pay him full price for it. We went from give to paying full price. We went from, if you agree and let me bury my dead, I need you to give me a place. And they've said, you can have any place you want. So the conversation is very subtly shifted. And then in verse 10, it said, now Ephron, who was sitting among the sons of Heth, answered. And you and I go, wait a minute, he's sitting there? Abraham just said, would you guys talk to Ephron for me? He's sitting right next to him. Why didn't you turn and say, Ephron, oh buddy, help me out here? No. He spoke to the leaders who offered anything he wants as a fair gift of our generosity and our love and respect. And he said, well, can you talk to Ephron for me? And I'm willing to pay Ephron full price. And Ephron stands up and says, here I am. I'm sitting right next to the guy you're talking to. Don't ignore me, I'm right here. Did Abraham know he was right there? Of course he did. This is all about the culture and the respect and what's going on. So Ephron says to him, in the hearing of the people at the gate and everyone around, so we're back to Boaz, we have the person we want to talk to, we have the witnesses, we have the situation, and we have the people that are there that can make the transaction happen. And he says, no, my Lord, hear me. I will give you the field. I will give you the cave that's in it. In the presence of the son of my people, I give it to you. Bury your head, dead. So Ephron is like, you can have it. And Abraham bows down and he speaks to Ephron in the hearing of the people. If you only will please listen, I will give you the price of the field. Accept it from me that I'm burying my dead there. Abraham intends to pay. Abraham doesn't intend to be given, although he started there. He is going along a standard cultural framework of seeing what are we willing to do. We're drinking tea. We're going to talk about what piece of land I'm interested in. Then we're going to start thinking about, will you give it to me or not? And then maybe we'll talk about price. And Ephron says in verse 14, my Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go bury your dead. So burying your dead is important. Honoring your wife, honoring your family is important. What's 400 shekels between friends? No worries.
400 shekels is a lot, right? I would imagine it's a tremendous.
That's 400 pieces of silver. That's not a cheap piece of land.
Right.
And what did Ephron just do? Ephron just, in a very kind way, said, well, it's $400. Abraham offered to pay. He offered to give. Abraham insisted on paying. He says, look, $400 between you and me. Hey, come on. It's nothing. I honor, I respect you. Go bury your wife. Because, well, it'd be too long before she stinketh. Right? Think about it. We're still on the first day here. So everybody understands what's going on. Everybody understands the immediacy of the situation. We're not going to talk about this. This isn't going to be good. And Ephron just named the price. Abraham listened to Ephron, and he weighed out for Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver. In Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, in the field and the cave within it, and all the trees which were in the field that were in the confine of its border were deeded over to Abraham for his possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, who were before everybody who went in and out of the gate of the city. Abraham brought the money with him.
A lot of money.
Says here, all in one transaction, Abraham weighs out, and as Ronnie pointed out, it wasn't cheap. He said to somebody, grab the donkey and bring it over. I need 400 shekels. This was a culturally appropriate Middle Eastern transaction with honor between seller and buyer, honor between foreigner and the tribe that he was living among. Honor was given, offered on both sides, and the transaction was acceptable to absolutely everybody. And like Boaz, it was witnessed by enough people that Ephron couldn't back out on it later. He couldn't say, well, he came to me, I told him a couple bucks, he paid me, but I thought about it, it wasn't enough, I should have, none of that. And as you notice, when he's talking to the sons of Heth in the beginning, Ephron's sitting there. He knows he's sitting there. Kind of hard to miss him. It's not that big a group. So when if we think about this, about buying a house ourselves, is this how you buy a house? Do you go knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I'd like to buy your house. Are you thinking about selling? I've got 12 witnesses with me, and I've invited your family and friends so they can hear this conversation. I was kind of hoping, well, I don't know, I might be wanting to sell. Well, would you give it to me? Well, no, I don't think I'd give it to you. And then, well, I don't know, that's not how we do business. And yet, in this culture, in this time, you get the two people together, you get the leaders to witness, you do it in the appropriate manner, you give and receive honor. And it's all done in the same day that Abraham needs to bury his wife. Because you're only, in the Middle East, even in the winter, you're not going to keep them laying around very long. So when we then look at how Jesus is doing some things that he does, one of the things he does a lot, and we've been talking about it, is he tells a parable. And if you think about it, quite often, if it was me, because I don't have any tact, and it was the scribes and the Pharisees sitting in front of me, I'd look at a guy, y'all are a bunch of idiots. Do you really understand what you're doing? You're just a bunch of stinking idiots. You guys really need to figure this out. And Robin's looking at me like, yeah, they're gonna make 8 friends or influence people. But that's how we do it around here. Very confrontational. Jesus, on the other hand, says, let me tell you a story. There was this guy, David, who had this one sheep, who is the lamb of the family and like a part of the family. And his other guy had hundreds of sheep, and somebody came to visit. He didn't want to kill one of his own sheep. So he went and took the guy next door, pet lamb, killed it and fed it to his friends. Do you think that's very nice? And David, of course, says, what? You got to be kidding. He took the pet lamb instead of killing one of his 300 or 400 sheep. Who is this guy? I'll kill him. And Nathan the prophet looks at him and goes, well, actually, it's you. You stole Uriah's wife. You already have 400 or 500, and you stole Uriah's wife and then had him killed. It wasn't really a story about sheep. It was a story about you. Oh, I don't like this story anymore. In the same way, Jesus tells parables. And he tells them for the same reason, is he can come at somebody from the side, and if they catch it, they would go, oh, no, you're right. Yeah, no. And quite often in the Bible, where Jesus is doing something, he'll ask a question like, so it's the Sabbath, and this guy's got a withered hand. Is it better to heal or not heal on the Sabbath? And the next part of the verse usually says, and nobody said anything. Because they know if they say, well, it's better not to heal him. He's sick, he'll always be sick. Well, Nobody else in the room is going to look at him and go, oh, that's a good answer. Don't heal the poor sick guy. But if they know, if they say to Jesus, well, yeah, it really is better off to heal him, go ahead and heal the poor guy, that they've got 437 rules for not healing people on the Sabbath. And so they've just said, go ahead and break all the Sabbath laws that we keep beating people with. And I bet that's not going to go well either. How about we just don't answer his question? And so the reason I bring these two stories up is that they're both real parallel, and they show what customs, procedures, processes, honoring people, and treating people with respect, how that works really well in the Middle Eastern culture. And when we look at how Jesus responds, he's doing very similar things. He's coming at people from the side, hoping that they go, instead of like me calling him an idiot, and then they're defensive, they're going to be defensive anyway. But if I can sneak in from the side, they might go, yeah, I'm going to need to think about that. Because, I'm not feeling very good about that last response. And so as we go through the things about Christ and how he deals with people, we need to remember who he's dealing with, where he's dealing with them, what culture he's in the middle of. We understand it from living in the Middle East. We've been to the Khan. It's taken an hour to buy a purse or a camel saddle. We know that if we go to somebody's house, don't say, that's a really pretty picture on the wall. Ronnie's got a very pretty picture on the wall. She's also on mute, so it's hard to tell, but
I said, let me take it off and give it to you.
I wasn't asking for your bed, just no. Right, exactly. It's Fuddle. It's yours. We know enough not to do that. We also know enough that Ronnie understands that I didn't mean it that way. But yeah, what day is it being delivered? So we need to understand, and we need to take that into consideration when we're talking about Christ. We're talking about what he's doing. He's talking about how he acts. Because the impact is greater when we understand what he's trying to do and how he's trying to do it. Than if we just say, well, why is he doing this the hard way? Why don't you just tell him, look, you guys are a bunch of idiots? Which he did do once. He said they were a whitewashed sepulcher. You're a grave that's been painted white so it looks really pretty, but on the inside you're full of dead people. Yeah, that one wasn't very veiled, I have to admit. But pretty much most of the time he comes at it from the side. Right?
The other thing that really strikes me about this is that Abraham is honoring Sarah. But I mean, I know you're drawing a parallel between these customs, but it just seems that not only is he wanting to do the right thing, but he's honoring Sarah by paying full price for the land, because he is wanting to make sure that there is no bad feeling around the purchase, or that he's honoring her for who she is, and that she meant so much to him that he would be willing, he's hopes that he can get that land, that he's willing to pay whatever it costs basically to get it, so that would be the place that he could bury, Sarah. I just think it's such, for me, when I read this, I also read that, because we have the cultural aspect of things where we think about, oh, there's this real dichotomy between men and women in the Middle Eastern culture, and women are so degraded or belittled or whatever. And yet this is really him honoring and respecting his wife in a way that is subtle, but not so subtle. I mean, if he didn't care for her, he certainly wouldn't be selecting that, spending all that money, spending the time with all the, and making sure, with all the witnesses, and making sure that it is done correctly. But seems
interesting. One of the things in the movie His Only Son that really is highlighted because Sarah keeps saying to Abraham, God spoke to you. God told you. He told you to leave your home. He told you to do this. He told you that we were going to have a child. It's 20 years later, we still don't have a child. We minimize maybe Sarah's faith or trust in Abraham. You know, I want you to pack up. I want you to leave your homeland, leave your family, leave security, leave a house and wander. Where are we going? I don't know. You know, yeah, I'll let you know when we get there. And continually, she's trusting that God is speaking, but God isn't necessarily, he's certainly not coming to her the way he's coming to Abraham. And yet she goes and she obeys. And most of the time she trusts. I mean, she has this little mishap with her maid, and you know, we get Ishmael, and that certainly wasn't God's plan, but it's interesting, you know, he was speaking to Abraham, but Sarah was believing. And there's a scripture in the New Testament, you know, blessed are those who've seen or heard, but even more so, blessed are those who have not seen, have not physically seen what, you know, what the disciples have seen and yet still believe. And that's us.
Mhm.
Are you looking up? I would not recommend sending somebody who doesn't know their Bible to go see this movie,
Mhm.
because they add things in there that I think they're trying to show you culture of the day, or I don't know what but they've got some really different kinds of things that happen as they're on their journey up to Mount Moriah. They meet some sketchy characters and some weird things happen, and it's like, that's not, you know, I'm not sure why you put that in there. It didn't make any sense. So somebody who doesn't know their Bible and is watching this and then thinking that that's really the story would be misled. But it is a powerful depiction of Abraham and the sacrifice that, you know, and his willingness to go, and so it was interesting, but you got to read the story first.
$60,000.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and it was on the donkey.
Like he had it,
Think about it. He does this transaction all in one go.
but he came prepared. But I'm sure he had more than that, but he came prepared, right?
Try to write a check.
Hold on, let me see what I got in my pocket.
But I mean, what I'm thinking, like,
Do you think he knew, like
that Sarah was gonna
already
go?
knew? He knew what he wanted before he got there, right? So
Yeah, because he knew about that obscure little cave at the back of that field. If you hadn't been there, you did what, I
he
mean,
wouldn't know it was even there.
no,
So he had his eye on that for a while.
that's very specific.
But, you know, give or take 60 grand on the donkey in the back, plus some extra just in case.
Can't even imagine just.
Do you think he and Sarah had picked that out?
I mean, you know, I can pick on all you because all of you are ladies. Sarah probably said, hey, look, if I die, I want to be buried.
I want to be right there.
That's right.
Remember this.
Sure that
This is
happened.
where I want to be. I can see that happening.
You could probably stop recording, Robin.
Oh, okay. Let me get my glasses on so I can
Uh-oh, just have glasses.